Hello and welcome to episode 61 of the Rockies Now podcast. We are a Colorado Rockies podcast. If you are a Rockies fan or just a baseball person, you can follow us at Rockies Now on all of your social media platforms. Thanks for joining with us today. I'm your host, Steven, along with the awesome co host, Tom, and our second co host, first podcast debut for Adam. Adam, what's up?
How's it going, guys? Happy to be aboard. Thank you.
Yeah, we're really excited. And again, Tom, we both talked about it right before we started. And, of course, early in the week, I told Tom that Adam was coming aboard. We're both excited. And, of course, Adam, he's going to be working with us at Bronco Source, who is we're all part of it together of the 5280 Media Company that we just started just recently. So we're excited about that. So you can catch Adam on the Bronco Source podcast over there. So, again, Adam, welcome aboard, and let's get this podcast going. And I'm excited for the future with you on board. All right, so we got some Rockies news yesterday or a couple days ago. I believe it was yesterday. Um, it was kind of unexpected because this is kind of the time when there's not a whole lot of baseball news. However, in the last week or so, we've gotten some managerial news. Of course, Terry Francona, he's heading to the Cincinnati Reds. Kind of shocked everybody, a lot of baseball fans, after having the health issues that he had and had to retire, leaving Cleveland, and now he's in Cincinnati, and then here we go, Bud Black, he's coming back on a 1-year deal extension. And when I heard when Adam texted me about the extension, I'm like, please be not like 2, 3, 4 years. I was just like hoping that was not the case, but it's a 1-year deal. And it's a safe deal. But like I told Adam and Tom before we started, I just feel like this is kind of like a 3-strike deal. 2023 was strike one. The Rockies lose their first 100, lost season of their franchise history. This year happened the same thing. Not a lot of progress. And then the Rockies extended for 1 more year. And I know a lot of Rockies fans out there, they're pretty unhappy. There's some of them that are okay with it. They feel like Bud Black is not the worst manager out there. But I think for me, this is this is a 3-strike deal. If Bud Black does not manage this team to a successful season, even though he's not a player, I get that. But if the Rockies do not, let's just say improve from this past couple of years, and the Rockies fail to avoid 100 losses again, I think there's a good chance that he will not return next year. And the question is, and I think you have to ask yourself, is he going to play the young players, which he did play the young players quite a bit this past year, especially Jordan Beck, whenever he was healthy, because, Beck, he was injured for a big part of the year with that finger injury. And, again, he's not perfect, but if he can play the young players and if we see improvement, I think he stays. But again, that's another question for another time that we'll, of course, talk about throughout the offseason. But for me, I was kind of shocked, but not, because again, if you go back to last week's podcast, I told Tom that it was 50-50 for me, that he could come back. He could, either step down, get fired, but we got our answer, and he'll be coming back for 1 more year. So first up, Tom, what are your thoughts on the move for the Rockies to extend Bud Black?
It doesn't surprise me in terms of pedigree and his long-standing relationship with the team, and especially Bill Schmidt. But the more I think about it, and I texted this to you, I think could be somewhat of a transition to the next manager. Perhaps, as you alluded to, maybe they already have him on the current staff. Maybe they're going to bring him in to become part of the staff this year and kind of have a transition where they ease the new manager in instead of just bringing him in cold turkey like most managerial hires are. Not exactly sure, but again, and I know, as we talked about in the pre-show meeting, all three of us, it's just kind of, we've all seen the comments. Oh, what are they doing? Back-to-back 100 losses? Well, let me tell you something. There are worse situations where coaches are allowed to stick around. The one that sticks in my mind is Hugh Jackson with the Cleveland Browns. He kept his job after an 0-16 season. So things could be, in my opinion, a lot worse as far as, how do I say this, sticking with a coach who had a failure of a season. I wouldn't characterize 100 losses as a total failure. And people say, what are you talking about? Well, look at the season the White Sox had. That's a total failure. So anyway, I've always liked Bud, and I've said it's unfortunate that he's never had a chance to manage in the World Series. He's a great manager. He's been to a World Series as an assistant coach, but never as a manager. So I don't mind him sticking around for one more year. He's at the age where you could say he is pretty much near retirement from the game, from the dugout. Again, we'll have to. It's going to be interesting to see how this whole period plays out. But I think this will be, in my opinion, if you ask me to predict, my closing argument would be I think this is his last season as Rocky. I almost said White Sox, as Rockies manager.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Adam, what about you?
Yeah, I think along the same lines as Tom, I wasn't really surprised. And Stephen, you and I have had conversations about what the Rockies do and don't do. And I've been harsh on Bud Black myself, Stephen, and you've seen it in the past. I feel like for the roster that he's been given and for the situation that he's in, I think he's doing his very best. He lacks the ability to control like his staff and like what players are brought in and things like that. So that can make it difficult for a manager. And one thing that I would really love to point out is under Bud Black, look at the improvement that we saw in Brenton Doyle specifically. Tolia was really good. So I feel like there's a lot of promise here. If Bud can continue to play the young guys, which I am a huge proponent of, because they're the future and the farm system is absolutely loaded. And I think Rockies fans are going to love this team for years to come. And I think there's some positives to be seen in this situation, even though Rockies fans may not love it.
Yeah, and Ty, he puts it well in the comments on YouTube. I'm confident the Rockies can do what the D-backs did last year if we called the young guys. Absolutely. I mean, again, we saw this year, for instance, Kansas City, they just lost over 100 games last year. They're in the playoffs, and yeah, I mean, right now it's not looking too good. As a matter of fact, I think they just got eliminated tonight by the Yankees. And then you look at another team in that division, the Tigers, and of course, it's going to a Game 5 in Cleveland on Saturday, but Detroit, I mean, not a lot of people had this team making the playoffs, last month, right? I mean, they had a 2% chance of making the playoffs, if even that, maybe even lower. And now here they are in the division series, and when they least expected it. And so, but yeah, I agree with you, Adam, is that, it's not the greatest rosters. There's not a lot of talent on this roster. Brenton Doyle, Ezekiel Tovar, Ryan McMahon, and that's basically it. And you could argue and say Chris Bryant. Well, Chris Bryant's barely played in a Rockies uniform, which sucks because I remember when he came here, we were like, hey, maybe the Rockies can have the extra push. But then a lot of people were saying, even before Bryant was signed in Colorado, a lot of people were concerned about the injuries to Chris Bryant because he had back issues in Chicago, and there was a lot of concerns there, the contract and everything. But yeah, Adam, I agree. You hit the nail on the nail on the head, right? And I think that there's just not a lot of talent on this Rockies roster that you can say, hey, this is Bud Black's fault. Because again, you go back to 2017, 2018, right? The Rockies make the playoffs those 2 years. Why? Well, because not only I think it was a good manager, Bud Black, but you had a good roster, of really good players: Nolan Arenado, Trevor Story, Charlie Blackmon, DJ LeMahieu, up and down that line of Mark Reynolds, Gerardo Parra, a bunch of dudes that could play baseball, right? And we're now you compare that, it's just like, yeah, this is a 100-loss team. And it's not because, well, Bud Black is a horrible manager. And no, it's just not a lot of talent on this team. And if there is talent, it's very, very young. Like these are 1-2 year players. Like Doyle, this was just his really second year in the big leagues, right? Tovar, second year in the big leagues. Nolan Jones, second year in the big leagues. A bunch of like year 2, year 3 guys, except Charlie Blackmon, who's now retired, and Ryan McMahon. But yeah, a bunch of like second year, third year guys on this Rockies roster. And you can't really point your finger and say, well, that's Bud Black's fault. And not only that, the playing the National League West division doesn't really help either. You got the Dodgers, you got the Giants, who are always, banging up against the Rockies, the Padres. However, the Rockies, they continue to own the Padres number, which I absolutely love. But the Diamondbacks, that's another team that absolutely has done well against the Rockies, especially in recent years, and with their young roster, like what Ty pointed out tonight in the comments. But yeah, it's just you can't really say, oh, again, it's Bud Black's fault. Oh, this is going to happen again, and next year. Well, again, a lot of it has to do with roster construction, where it is at this point, and the best the Rockies can do, play the young players, and I agree with Ty on that. So, um, yeah, it just I think we were talking right before we started. You're talking about that 6-year window, right? Where 6 years ago the Rockies were in the playoff last time, right? Going back to 2018, when the Rockies were in that window years ago before they made the playoffs. It was 6 years, and then they went to the World Series, right, in '07, right? Well, of course, even before that, they had a long stretch where they didn't make the playoffs, like 1995 to 2007. That's a many year stretch. Well, of course, some people forget about the 2009 playoffs, but then they had that long window where they don't make the playoffs. But it's just very interesting how over the last 5-6 years, the Rockies the following year make the playoffs. And a lot of people are wondering, can the Rockies make the playoffs in 2025? And it's definitely possible. And it can be done. And there's a way where it could happen. It's just that things have to go right. And of course, in the game of baseball, and of course, as Rockies fans, we know that generally never happens, but it could happen, especially if guys are, in there. Like, I think Doyle, he's ready. I think he's finally now become that big leaguer that we've been waiting for. Um, and so, yeah, I mean, Tom pointed out in our notes, never say never, and there's always that possibility. You never know. There's always that team that shocks people. Again, the Tigers were that team this year. The Royals, you can put the Royals in there. And that's what makes baseball so fun, right? I mean, even in 2007, people didn't have the Rockies in the playoffs, and here they sneak in. People didn't have the Rockies going to the World Series. They go all the way. So baseball, and especially in October, it can be crazy. And so it just, you never know. Will the Rockies make the playoffs next year? My prediction is no, but it definitely could happen. But maybe Adam does have a point, because again, right before we started, we talked about it, and it could happen. So we'll have to wait and see on that. We do have a comment here on Instagram from Mr. and Mrs. Vallejos 12, which this being Bud's last season potentially, will they attempt to make moves to help Black? Would it not be Dick Monfort's MO? I just feel like, knowing Dick Monfort, I feel like he would love to keep Bud Black for longer. Where again, I told Tom and Adam before we started, I just find it very interesting that the person that kind of announced this on the Rocky side was Bill Schmidt, not Dick Monfort, because generally you would assume that it's the owner that does these announcements, because Dick Monfort has done it in the past. Where the other day it was Bill Schmidt that made the announcement. I just found that very interesting, and I love how Bill Schmidt, he kind of put in building the farm system in there, because I feel like when Jeff Bridich was here, you never heard about, oh, we're building a farm system. Because if you look at the draft history, not very good. Yeah, I mean, the only notable player I can remember that Jeff Bridich drafted was Zach Veen, and you could put it in there, Michael Toglia. But a lot of the drafts didn't go well, right? When the Rockies, of course, part of it too is because the Rockies were in that good window of 2018, 2019. They had good, they had a little bit lower draft positioning, but I just like how Bill Schmidt is like, hey, we're building a farm system. Where I feel like when Jeff Bridich was here, you'd never really heard that. And and not only that, but the question was, because Tom and I, we both talked about this. There'd be so many times to where people would be asking Bill, not Bill Schmidt, but Jeff Bridich, are the Rockies rebuilding? What are the Rockies doing? What's the plan? And Jeff Bridich was like, yeah, we're just helping guys, signing these guys. He never gave a full answer. He would just keep his arms crossed, kept things close to the chest. Where I feel like Bill Schmidt is like, this, all right, this is our plan, building the farm system, drafting and developing our young players, which is what you want to do, especially in a place like Coors Field, Colorado, where it's a mid-market team. Nobody really likes to come here, especially the pitching. So what do you have to do? You have to draft and develop, and that's what the Rockies are doing. So, yeah, I just like how Bill Schmidt kind of put that in that little letter of like, hey, we trust in Bud Black to do what he did in 2017, 2018, when the Rockies had a young roster too, or a younger roster. So I think it's again, I think it's a good move for right now. But again, it was kind of head scratching, but it's not super surprising to say the least. So that was just my thought on that.
Just a comment about Jeff Bridich. I think his that was a comment. His press conferences or how he acted toward the media was always a combination of his background as a lawyer and his personality.
Yeah.
But well, the only comment I'll say about to this topic as far as for how they would change the team, like I said in our chat, never say never. There's always, as you just kind of alluded to, Stephen, and also Adam, when we were in our pre-show meeting, there's always that surprise team every year. Like 2 years ago it was the Diamondbacks. This year it was the Tigers or Royals. And to some extent would say the Guardians, because a lot of people had the Twins winning the AL Central, including me. But the one thing I wish I could be more, again, this is with my background being in finance, I wish I would more prelude to understanding each year a team's budget, because I'm intrigued to see how much of a payroll, what the limit of payroll, because every year, for people who don't know, there's always, of course, the owner sets the budget, the GM has to work within the confines of the budget, he has to cut payroll, add how much do you have to add or how much you have to slash. I'm interested to see what Dick Monfort's budget is for Bill Schmidt this year. And I'm just, while we were talking here, I'm just browsing this year's free agent class, just kind of refreshing it. I also look ahead to next year's free agent class. There's a lot of interesting options at the positions of need, particularly some strange options in the starting pitchers. One point of note, one of those free agent pitchers for next year will be our old friend John Gray. Don't expect a reunion. I don't think that's going to be happening anytime soon. But yeah, it's going to be very interesting. There's guys you could definitely say add and such, but also it's going to be interesting to see who's on the trade market, because we know the Rockies have difficulty luring free agents to Colorado, especially free agent pitchers. We all know how the Mike Hampton signing went, but or you could say the Wade Davis signing was good for 1 year, and then 2 years, not so much. But again, it will. Adam, I do agree with you. There always is the chance this team, this young core, does have the chance to solidify itself, saying, "Hey, we're ready to take that step." But the question is, when they do that, what are going to be the positions of need to supplement with veteran free agents?
Yeah, you were looking at the ages of MLB teams, and the Rockies are, I believe, the third or fourth youngest team in the major leagues, right? And 2 of the 3 youngest teams are Cleveland and Detroit. And for me, I think the Rockies, as far as position players are concerned, are probably the most talented team up and coming in the National League. So why can't they be next year's Tigers, you know what I mean, or next year's Royals? I think they would probably be more Royals, because I think if they just come in and add some veteran pieces on the pitching staff, like the Royals did, people were like in the offseason, they're like, what are the Royals doing? Why are they signing Waka and Lugo right now? Like, they're not ready to win, And I think if the Rockies did some stuff like that, you may be looking at some older guys, maybe a Kyle Hendricks or maybe a Jose Quintana type of just guys that can give you innings, soft contact. I don't see why the Rockies couldn't do that. They would need Dollander, of course, to be their Reagans, their Skubal, all of that. But position-wise, I think this team's going to be really good and fun to watch next year.
Yeah, and there's an article out there, I think it was just released just the other day by Thomas Harding, talking about, they were talking about, the next year for the Rockies, what are some of the things they're going to have to do. One thing that makes me a little concerned is that the Rockies, they were talking about getting guys that have had experience. And I'm not saying that, they're going to go out and get veteran players, but I just don't want them to get too many veterans. And I think, all of us know what that means. Like, I was fine, with the Jake Cave thing. And I know a lot of people weren't happy with him getting, as much as playing time as, Jordan Beck and everything. And a lot of people were tearing their hair out of their heads and everything. But, it's just, yeah, you do want experience with this team. But at the same time, though, how do you get experience with a young ball club? You play the young players. That's how you get experience. You just don't go out there and get, a 35-year-old guy. And I know, let me see if I can find that comment here. Ty, he puts out there that we should look into Paul Goldschmidt, where for me, I would disagree with that. I just feel like he is ready to retire. I mean, he's just, it's visible. I know a lot of people say, well, he could go back to Coors Field or go in the Rocky Mountain area. He'll do well. Well, you could argue, say the same thing that we said about Chris Bryant, because he had somewhat of a decline. He was still good in San Francisco, and but there was somewhat of a decline. And another player that reminds me a little bit of Paul Goldschmidt, even though he was quite a bit younger, is Ian Desmond. I remember, we signed him to that 5-year deal, and a lot of people were like, "Oh man, he's going to tear up Coors Field." Or another guy, Daniel Murphy. a veteran who was injured the previous year. A lot of people were like, "Oh man, he's going to mash in Coors Field. He's going to hit 440 or whatever," and then he's nothing but injured on the Rockies. And the first game or the second game of the season in Miami, Daniel Murphy, I think, broke his finger on a diving play at first base, and it's just like, I don't want that in Colorado. I'm sorry, Paul Goldschmidt. Maybe 10 years ago, Paul Goldschmidt would have worked out in Colorado, but no, it's at this point. And I agree, Tom, we all agree that Toglia is the guy at first base now.
100%.
Like this year, he proved it. Like he not only he had 20 plus home runs, it's just, you can't, replace Toglia and say, okay, thanks for hitting 24, 25 home runs this year. You're going to go on the bench next year. Like what? He's already earned it. He's earned that first base spot. And I'm glad that the Rockies realized that this year. And I think I don't think the Rockies, it would be pretty stupid for them to go out and get a first baseman when they already have one in Michael Toglia. And there's another comment. There's a possibility, like, again, not Daniel Hudson. I think maybe, Daniel Hudson, he could be an option, for pitchers. He's a, ground ball pitcher. But another guy is a guy that we had this past year, Dakota Hudson, a very good ground ball pitcher. Record not so good. But I thought Dakota Hudson did fine this year, even though he didn't pitch a whole lot. A lot of it had to do with run success or a lot of run support. Same thing with Ryan Filtner. If you look at his record, it's, I think, 3-10. But, he was arguably the best Rockies pitcher this year in the rotation. A lot of those losses were because of run support. And so I feel like this year, the Rockies, pitching wise, they were actually better than expected. It was their offense, because if you look at the numbers offensively for the Rockies this year, they were the worst ever in their franchise history, right? Well, it's not because, their players are bad. It's just that a bunch of the younger players are, again, like I said, in their second, third year. You're going to have growing pains. Nolan Jones really had a horrible year, and yeah, he was injured, but again, he just had that off year. So if everybody's clicking, next year, I'm talking from top of the lineup to the bottom, I think this team could definitely be a wild card contending team. It just needs to stay healthy, and the pitching needs to be there. But the exciting part is, and I know Adam, he talked about Chase Dollander. Chase Dollander could be up here next year. Carson Palmquist, he already ended the season in AAA. Sean Sullivan, he's another guy to keep an eye out. I know a lot of people are really excited about him. Gabe Hughes, he's coming back. I think he's actually pitching right now in the Arizona Fall League in Arizona. And I'm excited. The Rockies, they have guys. Not only that, but they still have Marquez under contract for at least another year. Senzatella, I think he definitely can be a guy because he's had experience in the playoffs. Freeland, he's still around, and Freeland actually had a pretty decent season despite the ERA. He still had very good starts for the Rockies this year. There's even a possibility that Cal Quantrill could come back. However, the Rockies did state, I think, right around the All-Star break, that they weren't considering re-signing him, but it wouldn't hurt.
He will be back. He's still under contract.
He's still under contract. That's okay.
One more year.
Yeah, and then another guy that comes to my mind, of course, he's not a pitcher, but Jacob Stallings, he has another year in a contract. I think he'll be back. The Rockies are probably going to have him and Drew Romo as the two catchers.
It's a mutual option, so both sides agree, and he opts in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I know, again, Tom and I, we've talked about this multiple times at the end of the season on our Rockies recaps, but a lot of people are unhappy with, the decision not to play Drew Romo for 15, 16 straight days. A lot of it has to do, again, with, again, Drew Romo, he basically started almost every single game for the Isotopes. And at this point, it's just about, and he's still participating in batting practice and doing the fielding stuff. But I think it's just more like he ran out of gas. He's tired. Same thing with Jordan Beck. A lot of those guys were just tired in their first year. And so, again, I expect Romo to be that backup catcher at least. And that's why, who knows, it could switch in spring training. If Romo stays hot, if Romo gets hot in spring training, he could be the starting catcher and Stallings be the backup. We shall see. But yeah, just going back again, finishing off with the free agents and all that for the Rockies, I just don't think that would be a good idea. I'd be fine if the Rockies get one or two bullpen guys, to help the bullpen with the young players. However, I do think that the bullpen is in a much better spot with the young guys that they have now. Luis Peralta, Seth Halverson, who could be a future closer. The Rockies have multiple guys in that bullpen that could be, closers. Again, Luis Peralta, he was a stud this year. I think he only gave up like 1 earned run this year or something like that, if any. Halverson only gave up like 1 home run this year. And Vodnik, who again on our Rockies Now page, go check it out on Instagram, X, and Threads. Our followers voted Vodnik as the Rookie of the Year and the relief pitcher of the year. So it goes to show you that the Rockies, they have guys in their bullpen that could be really good. Not to mention the Rockies had one of the best bullpens, finishes in Major League Baseball. So it goes to show you, hey, there's pieces in that bullpen. And the reason why the Rockies have won a bunch of games in the second half compared to the first half is because of the bullpen. And I feel like, if you look at the bullpen ERA for the Rockies, it's horrible. I think it's like 7 something. It was really, really bad. But there's definitely pieces there. And then the rotation, it wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be this year. And then again, like I said, the worst part was offensively. But again, a lot of it has to do with the younger players getting their second, third year in. That's why I don't think getting free agent hitters is going to be a good idea. And they shouldn't do that, in my opinion. I think they just should let the young kids play, give them their second year. Maybe you'll have a Britton Doyle type of year for, I don't know, maybe these guys will just get better. But like talking about a guy that had a down year, maybe, I don't know, Jordan Beck will have that, Doyle year next year. Maybe, I don't know, Nolan Jones will win a comeback player of the year award next year in 2025. The possibilities are endless, but in my opinion, the Rockies should absolutely not get any free agent hitters in the offseason. Just focus on the pitchers, get a couple relievers, save some money, and do that for the draft next year. If you want to allocate some of that money to the draft and getting a good draft pick, do that. Just don't get a free agent hitter, because I just feel like the Rockies, they just don't need that right now. Let the young kids develop. And if they want to get a bench piece, just get one. That's it. Or if they want to bring back Jay Cave as a one bench guy, veteran, I'm fine with it, but just do not get any free agent hitters out there, so.
100% agreed.
Yeah. It just, again, like, I just don't want it, because I mean, I'll say this, the Rockies, I think they know what they're doing, because again, if the Rockies were, with their head cut off like a chicken, right? They would be running around getting all these free agents, but the Rockies, they, for instance, Jurgensen Profar, which I know, Adam, we talked about it the other night, about him getting that big knock for San Diego. But you talk about the seasons he's had. He was an all-star this year, but he was so bad here in Colorado that the Rockies made obviously the right decision to cut him, because they felt like, hey, Doyle deserves that spot, or, eventually Jordan Beck, he'll be up here next year. There was a possibility that Profar was going to come back. I don't think he was going to come back anyway, but it's just like, that's, it's just the Rockies, they need to make those moves of like, hey, the younger players, they're more important. And again, another interesting thing to watch out for, even though it's basically been confirmed that Bryant will be back next year, is that the Rockies at least were like, hey, we're going to give Toglia the first base spot. And if Bryant does come back, Bryant's going to be DH only. But, again, the question is that we're going to have to go into spring training next year. Is this going to be it for Chris Bryant? Because if he gets injured one more time, I think he's out. He's out. I'm sorry. He just, it's unfortunate, because again, a lot of us, I was excited when he came over here, because it's just like, hey man, we have a veteran, because the Rockies, they needed extra pop in that bat. It just, the guy's the most unluckiest person in the history of sports. And it just like, you got to feel bad for him, but it just, at this point, you got to cut ties with him. But I mean, I guess it's nice to have a Chris Bryant guy to be in there, because again, when he came to Colorado, he talked about being that Ben Zobrist guy on, when he was with the Cubs, how Ben Zobrist was that veteran guy to help the Cubs in 2015, 2016. But it just, at this point, Toglia and the young guys deserve their time to shine and grow.
$104 million is a lot of money to eat.
Yeah, you can't cut him. The only way is to basically say, hey, Chris, can you please retire? But at the same point in time, though, the Rockies, again, they don't have that much money. And so it's a lot of money. And I'm not sure if the Rockies would be willing to do that.
I think the most discouraging thing about the Bryant situation, right? Because we all wanted him to succeed here, is the Rockies are already very gun shy when it comes to spending money in the free agent pool. So my fear becomes, when it is time, right, 2026, 2027, whatever we're predicting here, when it is time for them to go out and add somebody to this offense or to the pitching staff or whatever it may be, that they're going to say, well, we tried that and it didn't work, and they've done it with Desmond, and
Yeah.
it's worked out with Kadire and a
Mhm.
couple other guys in the past, but I
Giambi.
feel like, I feel like the Rockies just may use that as an excuse, hopefully not,
Mhm.
to not add to the team when they need to, because they're with all the talent they have coming up, they're still going to have to make some moves in order to compete with the Dodgers year in and year out, because the Dodgers are going nowhere for the next decade at least.
Yeah.
I don't know, Tom, what do you think?
Yeah.
Well, especially considering the fact is, I brought this up the other day when it comes, the Dodgers have quite a sweet TV deal that they signed a couple years ago with the regional sports networks changing. The Dodgers have quite an influx of money coming in from that TV deal, even though the Guggenheim Group is worth more than a few truckloads of money. But I do agree with you, Adam. But the point is, the way I look at it, to your point earlier, the position players at this point for next year are basically set. The only one you could put maybe a question mark next to is second base, because we don't know exactly what Brendan Rodgers' future is going into the last year of arbitration. Because we're all hoping that Amador maybe offers some sort of value, whether it's an everyday player, maybe as a bench bat, because he is a switch hitter, and those are very valuable, especially if you can find one with his athleticism. But it's just, this pitching staff is going to be interesting to see. I just while you were talking, Adam, two scenarios popped into my head as far as signing a pitcher. That's based off two of the free agents for this offseason. What would you say? The Rockies either sign the biggest contract in free agent contract in history with Corbin Burns and add him to the rotation, or they sign arguably just a filler, and the filler guy is, wait for it, Patrick Corbin. So it's just like two scenarios. You go, one of those scenarios excites Rockies fans and we're all to the moon, or the other one where we all just go, oh really, come on. So it is rather interesting. I'm not sure. It'd be interesting if he actually, side comment, if Patrick Corbin actually pitches next year, because he's not going to Washington, because obviously he's that they used part of that contract to get a World Series ring, but then after that they paid for it. It's just, I would. The one thing is, if there was some way that we could just kind of, I think if this pitching staff could get kind of a jolt or a tweak, maybe that really is what could, to Adam, to your point, kind of provide a spark plug that really just ignites this team, and we become the surprise team of 2025.
Yeah, I don't see them going after Corbin Burns, although I think we would all agree that Corbin Burns would absolutely play at Coors Field. His stuff plays in a big way, but that's obviously not going to happen. We can hold out hope that it would, but I think we're looking more at guys, like I said, like Quintana, or maybe a Kyle Gibson, or guys that the Rockies typically bring in situations like that, Steven.
Yeah, there's no way that's Corbin Burns going to come here. And plus, we've seen several years in the past, and we've seen it recently. Pitchers, they hate coming here. I want to say, it was either Verlander or Max Scherzer that they were talking. I think when the All-Star game was here in Colorado, they were like, "I hate it here. This place stinks. I hate pitching here." You can talk about every single opposing pitcher that pitches at Coors Field. They hate it here. Now, there's a few. I think there was a couple guys that actually said, "Actually, I don't mind it. It's not too bad." But almost every single guy hates coming here. Like Kershaw hates coming here. I know that for a fact. He's talked about that. Walker Buehler, I think, has said it a few times. So yeah, it's not going to happen. That's why the Rockies, they're developing pitching, and they have a bunch of young arms. But yeah, that's the difficult thing about Colorado. And the thing that was coming to my mind, again, of course I'll be getting off track here a little bit, but there's that possibility of expansion to because of course we already know about Utah getting that new hockey team. But what if in the next few years, whenever baseball expansion does happen, because it's going to happen, 2 more teams will be added. So the question is Utah going to be one of those 2 teams? Because now Utah, they're really pushing for baseball. And of course, now they already have the Jazz, now they have the hockey team, and now that market is exploding right now. So right now they're looking at baseball. If Utah does get a baseball team, at least the Rockies would have somebody to kind of share that high altitude couch with them, I guess. And so it would be kind of cool though, because it would be kind of cool to have a Rocky Mountain rival in baseball. So it's just that, going back to the pitching, it's not going to happen as much as it would be kind of cool to see Verlander back when he was healthy and good, to see him at Coors Field. But it doesn't happen. You have to develop your own pitching, and the Rockies, they've had good success with those guys. And talk about Ubaldo Jimenez, Herman Marquez, who leads the Rockies franchise in strikeouts, despite now he came over in a trade from Tampa Bay, but he, for a little while, he was in the Rockies farm system. Kyle Freeland led the Rockies to a win in the wild card game, finished fourth in Cy Young voting in 2018, the closest since Ubaldo. Right. And then you look at other guys in the rotation. I mean, Jason Jennings was another guy that the Rockies drafted and developed. He won the Rookie of the Year in 2002, I think. And so, yeah, I mean, the Rockies, they've had history. Maybe it's not, a lot of good history numbers, but you just, the Rockies, they have to go that route. And I think they definitely have a guy in Chase Dollander, who, again, was picked ninth out of, which I think is a steal. He was ninth overall out of Tennessee. And, of course, I know there's rumors that the Rockies actually wanted Rhett Lauder, but I think Dollander was also another very good pick. It's almost like, the three quarterbacks right now in the NFL, rookie quarterbacks that are succeeding: Jaden Daniels, Bo Nix, and Caleb Williams, right? Well, you could get all three of them, and right now they're playing good football, right? So, of course, fingers crossed, all three of them play good football. But at this point, the Rockies, they got a really good pitcher in Dollander. Solon Sullivan has been great. Carson Palmquist, he's been elite. He was elite in Double A Hartford. And again, there's a bunch of other guys that are in, the lower minor league systems that are really, really exciting. So the Rockies, their pitching is coming. And I feel like actually, if they come this year, the Rockies have a whole lot of depth, where if you talk about a few years ago, the Rockies had zero depth. They had nobody. They didn't have Dollander. They didn't have Sullivan. They didn't have Palmquist. They had nobody. And so they had to rely on guys like Peter Lambert or, bullpen guys, Jake Bird. Now the Rockies, they have that depth, which is good because, now you're starting to see that. So, but yeah, it's just the Rockies, they cannot go the route of like, hey, let's sign a free agent hitter when you already have young hitters. And not to mention, I will say this too, that this past year, even though the Rockies offense was historically bad, this year the Rockies had 4 guys had 20 plus home runs, seasons, which is the first time since 2019 when the Rockies had Nolan, Trevor, I think Ian Desmond hit 20 that year, and then Charlie Blackmon. So it shows progress, because if you look at 2020, of course, that was a shortened season, but 2021, the Rockies didn't have a 20 home run hitter, except I think it was McMahon. I think he was the only guy, because Trevor Story only had I think 14 or 15 or 16, whatever it was. He might have had 20, but yeah. So it just goes to show you that there's a lot to be excited about. And I do agree with, Ty in the comments. And I think the Rockies do have several of these guys already in the clubhouse, but he says, I think we need just one guy in the locker room that gets everyone hyped and excited to play. And I agree with that, because if you go back to 2017, 2018, the guy for that Rockies squad, well, the Rockies, again, they had a couple of those guys, but one stands out to me was Gerardo Parra. He was that guy that really was in the dugout. He was a jokester. And that was a really good signing by the Rockies, by the way. I mean, again, the Rockies, it's not like every single signing they've ever made has been bad. No, they've actually made some really good signings, right? And we're fortunate that he was able to play here. Another guy's Cargo. He was that guy that a lot of guys just gelled to. He always had a smile on his face, and he was just a leader. And I feel like the Rockies already have those guys. It's just that we're kind of waiting to see who that guy is. But I think we're already seeing with Doyle, Nolan Jones, and of course now with Charlie out, it's going to have to be McMahon or somebody else. But yeah, it just, I feel like the Rockies, again, we've talked about it many, many times here on the podcast. The Rockies, they have guys, they have dudes. It's just that, can they put it together? And I think they definitely can, considering the history of the Rockies, where this has happened before. Despite, this is the first time the Rockies have lost 2 100 loss seasons, right? So we're in the right direction. I agree with Adam, since the, start of the podcast, when he mentioned about the Rockies heading the right direction, we're getting close. I agree with him. I think, this is something that Tom and we've talked about. The Rockies, they're right there. They're almost right there. They're over the hump. And like Bill Schmidt mentioned a couple years ago during the winter meetings, it's almost like, the Rockies are kind of like that bamboo. Like not a lot of people see it yet, but when they do, they're going to see it. Kind of like Arizona, and it's going to be coming, and people are going to be surprised. And I think next year could be that next year. Of course, we don't want to, over imaginate things or overhype everything, but I feel like the Rockies have that guy. And another guy that, again, Ty points this out in the comments that we haven't been talking enough about is Zach Veen. And
that's my guy.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, of course, for Tom, his guy is Victor Vodnik, and yours is Zach Veen. For me, I don't know, maybe Jordan Beck, is that guy. But Zach Veen has been somebody that's been on the Rockies radar for the last 4 years, right? Drafted in 2020. A lot of people were thinking that this guy was going to be the next face of the franchise, even though now I feel like the future face of the franchise is going to be Charlie Condon, given the status that he has through college. But Zach Veen, he has the chance to write a perfect story of how there was a lot of questions in AA. Can this guy even reach AAA? Because he had so many injuries, and there was a lot of concern. Even Tom and I, we would talk about this multiple times. Is like, can Zach Veen get out of AA? Can he stay healthy? And he did that, and he stayed healthy in AAA, and he did pretty well. And now, granted, it's not an easy jump from AA to AAA, despite it's the Pacific Coast League where you hit very well, and the pitchers are not very good, but yet you're still playing against guys that have either played in the big leagues or about to get there. So Zach Veen, I think he's definitely a big part of this. And again, I feel like it almost feels like, Zach Veen is kind of like a Colton Cowser of the Orioles, and Drew Romo is that Adley Rushman. Now, I'm not saying that Romo is going to be a Rushman, but I just feel like the Rockies, they have those guys that like the Orioles had. Kansas City with Bobby Witt Jr. I feel like Tovar is kind of like in that mix, right? Even though Bobby Witt Jr. is becoming an MVP type of player, right? I think Tovar eventually gets there. And the crazy thing is that Tovar is only 23 years old, right? And he's still young. He still has, at least maybe 10 years of his, prime to go. I mean, he's going to be a great player. He's going to be an all-star, I think, next year. So the Rockies, they have a bunch of guys. It's just that right now we're just waiting for the last few pieces of the puzzle to get together. But yeah, like what we talked about this at the start of the show as we wrap up tonight, you look at the Tigers, man. I mean, you look at the roster, for me, it's still not complete. There's still a few holes in that roster, and yet they're in the division series, man. I mean,
100%.
Kansas City, they have a few pieces in that roster as well that I feel like they could definitely use a little bit of this, a little bit of that. But yet they're playing the Yankees in the division series, and of course they just lost tonight. But the Rockies, they need that, and I feel like they already have that. It's just that we're waiting for those players to have that big year. And a lot of people are saying that next year is going to be that big year where everyone clicks, because again, you're going to have down years, you're going to have off years where you're injured. But I feel like next year could be that first year of like, hey, this is what we got. And so, but yeah, like Ty points it out, that Tovar extension was, I think, the first sign of like, hey, we're committing to our young players, which it was definitely needed. I think the next guy to get handed out a contract is definitely Doyle. I could see him get extended this offseason. Now, exactly. Well,
if
you look at the throw in Milwaukee, man, that just goes to show you he's the best center fielder in baseball. I don't care I mean, listen, Mike Trout, his days are over. He's still a good player, but his MVP days are over. I think it's unfortunate because Trout, he's been injury prone over the last couple of years with injuries, but I think that mantle is going to go off to Doyle of being the best defensive, for sure, center fielder in baseball, maybe even arguably one of the best center fielders in baseball. He is already. I mean, if he's already arguably the best center fielder in the National League, I mean, you still have Jackson Merrill up there in San Diego, but still, if you give me Jackson Merrill versus Britton Doyle, I'm taking Doyle all day. I mean, I'm being biased, but actually, in terms of defense and offensively, I'm still giving out the award to Doyle. There, it's just like Adam said, he needs to be extended right now. Nolan Jones, I'm still waiting on him, but again, the Rockies, they have that core of Toglia, Doyle, Jones, Tovar, and we still have Fernandez. We still have Zach Veen, Charlie Condon. If you look at the Rockies potential roster, even for next year or in the next couple of years, it's stacked with a bunch of talent. And then you go to the pitching. What about the pitching? Well, the pitching, I think, is going to be stacked. Dollander, Gabriel Hughes, right? Sullivan, Palmquist. That's a solid 4 guys in that rotation. And if you keep Marquez or Freeland, that's a solid rotation, man. And then you talk about the bullpen. So it's coming. You just have to wait. And I think, like we've all been talking about, it's coming. You just have to wait. And I know that these 100-loss seasons suck, but you look at the Baltimore Orioles. They had multiple 3, 4, 5 straight 100-loss seasons, and look where they are now. Yes, they haven't had much success over the last couple of years getting over the hump, but I'd rather have postseason success and winning seasons rather than having multiple 100-loss seasons of no progress. And that's another thing too that I'll mention very quickly before we end tonight is that Brandon Hyde, the manager for the Orioles, had to go through that and see, it goes to show you that it wasn't his problem. The reason why the Orioles were losing all those games, a large part of it was because they were losing on purpose for draft compensation and draft picks. Why? Because they saw that they needed to build a farm system, which the Rockies are doing right now. Not to mention the Rockies have a very good chance of getting a number 1 pick. Ethan Holiday. That's, as Tom knows, Tom and me, we've been talking about it. I want Ethan Holiday so bad, man, because if he goes to the Rockies, now, granted, there's a lot of people saying, well, you might be overrating him a little bit. No. If you get Ethan Holiday in Colorado, he's going to hit.
And he might be better than Jackson.
Might be better, yeah, better than his dad. You just look at the profile of him, and I'm not concerned about Jackson Holiday either. Jackson, I think, is only 20 years old, and people are already down on Jackson. He's going to be an MVP player for the Orioles to come. It's going to come. And I think if we get Ethan Holiday, the Rockies, I mean, I know a lot of people are like, well, we have too many outfielders, but hey, if he can hit and if he can be an MVP type player for the Rockies in the future, get him. I don't care if he's a pitcher, infielder, outfielder, get the best player you can and available. That's who they got this year in Charlie Condon. If Holiday's right there, the Rockies, I feel like they have to get him. It'd be pretty stupid if they don't get him, which I think they will, because knowing the Rockies, which is the nice thing about the Rockies is that they love guys that have had experience, which they're, the dad of Ethan, played several years here in Colorado and won and should have won a MVP in 2007. But, and he helped the Rockies go to the World Series that year. So Ethan Holiday, man, you just hope that the Rockies can get him in the draft. Of course, that's something that we'll talk about next year when the draft comes around and once we get into the regular season. But as of right now, I think in 2 months when the draft lottery will be taking place, we'll find out where the Rockies will be drafting. But as of right now, the Rockies are slotted to be the number 1 pick in the draft next to the Miami Marlins. But if I'm correct, who had the worst year? I don't have the standings in front of me, but who had the worst year? Was it the Rockies or the Marlins?
Do you forget the White Sox?
Well, the White Sox
are already out of it though because
they can't.
In terms of record, the White Sox had the worst record, but they will only get the 10th pick because of the market. Because of the new draft rules. I believe it was the Marlins.
Yeah, so in some ways, that's actually because here's the thing. Over the last couple of years, we've seen a lot of the number 1 teams, the worst teams, actually get like the number 2, number 3, number 4. In some ways, you want to be the second or third worst team. And because we saw a couple of years ago, Pittsburgh, for instance, I think, Washington was the worst. Washington got second. Pittsburgh was the second worst. Washington and Pittsburgh flipped. And I'm not saying that's going to happen this year, but I feel like the Rockies would have a better chance of being like the second worst compared to the first worst, because I feel like, your odds are higher, but at the same time, though, it could get flipped. And again, this is going to be a huge draft. Again, we'll talk about this next year.
Real quick correction. I'm sorry to cut you off, but I have to do a correction. It was actually we were one game worse. Marlins were 62 Marlins 62 and 100. We were 61 and 101. So just quick.
Well, now it's better to be the worst. now it is
right.
Well, we can always do a draft day trade up.
Yeah, I mean, that's one thing I wish baseball could do is that, you could trade up, where in the NFL draft you can do that, where in baseball you can't do that necessarily.
Or trade draft picks.
Yeah, trade draft pick. You can't do that, which is unfortunate. And I wish the Rockies could do something like that, where they could trade Brendan Rodgers, which they could have done a couple years ago, trade Rodgers to Miami for that Edward Cabrera pitcher, who, he's not as good as I thought he was going to be, but I mean, he's still young. But as I was going back to the draft, the Rockies, this is going to be the Rockies the last year to be in the top 5, top 10, right? Yeah. Because after this year, the highest the Rockies could be is going to be number 10, right? So this is the last opportunity for the Rockies to be in that position. And so if I'm the Rockies, you got to land this pick, and I think they will. Knowing, and of course, we don't really know the draft picks or the draft prospects other than Ethan Holiday. But from what I've heard, this year is going to be that year where the Rockies could definitely be getting another face of the franchise type of guy. And again, if you look at the last couple of draft picks, Charlie Condon this year, the year before that, the Rockies got Chase Dollander, and even the year before that, Gabriel Hughes. It's just the Rockies, they have a bunch of young players, I think, that we're starting to see go up through the system very quickly, and I think they're going to be ready to go. And again, there's even conversations about Condon playing later next year, if things go well, if he starts hitting the ball well in AA or AAA, wherever he starts after spring training. The Rockies, they're going to have a bunch of guys that are already going to be ready, and it's going to be exciting to watch. So that's going to wrap it up. Go ahead.
If Condon makes a big leagues next year, that's got to be the fastest rise in one-year rise in Rockies history.
Yeah, for sure. And
not even close.
Yeah, and again, they have the pieces to do it. It's not like, well, there's still a couple more years the Rockies still need to do certain. No, I feel like the Rockies, they have that roster, they have the chance to do it. It's going to be hard. Don't get me wrong, it's going to be hard. And I'm not saying that it's going to happen, but it has happened. It has happened before. Again, Kansas City, they did it, and their roster wasn't as complete. They have Salvi, who is a veteran catcher. He's good, but like there's still a few pieces like in there. Like for instance, Detroit, Matt Vierling. I don't really like him as an outfielder for Detroit. He doesn't fit well for me in Detroit. I feel like they could have gone somebody younger. And I like what Detroit did this year with Colt Keith and Zach McKinstry, who is still on the younger side, even though he's more of a veteran now. But like Detroit, they have a couple of those guys that are like, I just don't really think that he fits that roster very well, but yet they're in the division series. Well, why? Well, because again, they have a bunch of young, bright players, Spencer Torkelson, right? Then they have that Tarek Skubal, who had that year. Almost reminds me of 2018 Kyle Freeland, right? That's how good Skubal was this year. And he's probably going to win the Cy Young this year. I mean, he already won, I think, the Triple Crown this year as a pitcher. So it's insane. But I just feel like the Rockies, they have that. It's just that we're waiting for that. And again, good things happen to those who wait, right? And so I feel like the Rockies, they're kind of waiting for that period. And I think 2025, as much as a lot of people are expecting next year to be another horrible year, you never know. I mean, I assume, I think if you talk to a lot of Royals fans last year and say, hey, you guys are going to, go to the division series next year, a lot of them would say, nah, it's not going to happen. We have a good few young players like Bobby Witt. You have the Sasquatch of Vinny Pasquantino. You have some nice pitchers, Brady Singer, but that's basically it. But you had a bunch of guys that had all-star seasons with the Royals and that pitching staff. Seth Lugo had a good year. Cole Reagans, right? That's what we're looking for the Rockies next year. If the Rockies make the playoffs, it's going to be because of their guys in that roster had career years and their starting rotation, is okay. Like if the Rockies have starters that have 4 or 5 ERAs, we're going to be fine next year. And they had that, someone in 2018, despite, of course, Marquez had a really solid year. Freeland had a really good year, of course. John Gray, however, did not have a good year, but it's just that the Rockies, they just need to have career years next year. And that's a lot to ask, but they can do it, I think.
I'm already starting the playoff train right now. I'm telling you right now, they're going to be in the playoffs.
Yeah.
I can feel it, dude.
Yeah.
I think also there's two other factors I think, and Adam, I think you partially alluded to this earlier. One is continuity with the lineup. Because I talked about how I think all 9 positions, with the exception of maybe one, is set. If you can get everyday consistency when it comes to lineup with our everyday guys, or who we expect to be everyday guys, that is something that could really lead the charge. And then as far as number 2 thing I'll make about this, there could be a big shakeup change in some of the teams in the division, such as, I think we all can agree, Blake Snell is opting out this year. He's going to exercise up and he's going to go somewhere else. Now the question is, where does he go? And the other thing is also, I mean, Shohei, we don't need to talk about how great he is. I mean, that story writes itself. But as far as how he fits into the Dodgers pitching rotation, as well as, I'm not so certain about the Diamondback starting rotation next year, because I think, I believe Kelly is under contract for a couple more years, whereas Zach Gallen is a free agent, not this year, but next year.
Yep.
Yeah. So I think the door could slowly be swinging open for us to walk through it for I should say the door of opportunity. So again, to your point, Adam, the Charge can lead if a couple of things go happen. Plus, also one last point I will make is too, as far as the pitching rotation, it was encouraging with Quantrill, Gomber, and Feltner each having 29 or more starts. So if you could also get some consistency out of the rotation, that could definitely help with bullpen management, which I think could make it a little easier. And one prospect I'm high on that I don't think a lot of people are talking about is Brody Brecht, because one pitch he throws is the splitter. If he does make it to the big leagues, it would, with the Rockies, it would be interesting to see how that splitter plays at Coors Field.
Yeah, that was a steal in the draft, by the way. He was still available in that draft, and a lot of people were like,
crazy.
Yeah. Again, this year's draft was crazy. I loved it. But yeah, I mean, again, we're already jumping on that train. I'm going to jump with Adam on that train as well. I think 2025, keep sleeping on the Rockies, because I'm wearing the t-shirt, Catch the Fever of the Rockies. And again, I don't want to be too hopeful, but again, there's that possibility where it could happen. And I know, I believe it was either Drew Goodman or I think it was either Patrick Lyons or Drew Goodman. I forget. It was one of the Rockies podcasts. It might have even been, yes, it was one of those two guys, but they were talking about how, every 6 years in between, the Rockies had made the playoffs, right? Actually, it was DNVR. Christian Size over at DNVR. Shout out to him, but he actually mentioned it. So now, as I remember, he talked about the 6-year cycle, if you want to call it that, to where the Rockies, they've had periods of 6 years of losing. After that, they make the playoffs. And so, again, shout out to Christian over there at DNVR Rockies for mentioning that. But yeah, if you want to be, if you're a betting person, which I am not, Tom and I, we're not over here at Rockies now, we're not betting people. But if we're going to bet, maybe the Rockies will make the playoffs next year as a wild card spot.
Book it.
Yeah. And again,
I'm there.
And if you talk about Doyle, because again, having that big year is going to give you a boost of confidence. And again, now next year, fingers crossed, knock on wood, he doesn't get hurt or has a slow year. But when you have years like this helps your morale. Say, I can do this. Where Nolan Jones was just like, it was more of that where I feel like this year, a lot of people gave him the MVP conversation, and it was just like too much expectations on him, where now we know what to expect from Doyle, right? We know what to expect from Tovar. We know what to expect from a bunch of these younger other guys. So now all they have to do is just play baseball. And that's what we're looking at as Rockies fans. Just play baseball, play the best as you can, and it will all come together in due time. And I think we're right there. We're right there.
Just one quick thing. They're literally building the National League Orioles is what they're doing. They've got a bunch of sluggers. They're going to be loaded in the lineup. They're going to struggle a little bit with the pitching as far as developing it and having like big names. And of course, we know that we don't spend money on pitching, and neither do the Orioles. So I think that's the good comp for the Rockies. And if we build an Orioles team and we go to the playoffs 2 years in a row, even if we don't win in the first round, dude, we're going to the playoffs. I want to go to the playoffs. Yeah, I'll take that over 100 loss seasons. So things are looking up, guys.
Yep. Yeah. Tom, any final thoughts?
Well, just to kind of use the old football joke, playoffs? You're talking about playoffs? The Jim Moore. I swear, every time. Jim Moore Sr., my goodness. Anyway, sorry, I had to throw that in there.
That's good. That's good.
Anyway, real quick point, Adam. I think we should start a hashtag for Playoff Push 2025. So somebody come up with that one. Eric, we should have anybody who's listening, if you got a good hashtag for a Playoff Push in 2025, and send it to us. Yeah, because we could definitely set the trend here. Adam, you can lead the charge for this one.
I will. I'll happily do that.
I do. I honestly, that's a good comp. If we could build a 2020 kind of an Orioles rise, because again, hopefully we don't suffer as lengthy of a rebuild period or let me rephrase it, lengthy or an awful rebuild in terms of record as they did. Hopefully it doesn't come to that. But I do agree. But the difference, I think Brendan Hyde with him, he was going to be the transition guy, the rebuild transition guy, but he ended up being, they liked him so much that they let him be the guy who also managed the contending team, which he's good. It's just, I don't know. The Orioles, they got to kind of figure out their pitching staff. As to your point, I don't know if Corbin Burns is coming back, because when you got Scott Boras as your agent, you never know where that player.
He's not coming back, man. He's going to the Cubs or something. Watch Mets.
Oh
Cubs,
God! If he
Dodgers.
if he comes to the Cubs, I'm just going, oh God, come on. Anyway, but I do agree with you. It could be something like that. If we could build a lineup like that, or like the Orioles currently have now, even with still question marks about what Jackson Holliday's role is going to be in the lineup, I think the sky is the limit for us, especially considering how some big time sluggers in our history have thrived, and not just Nolan, Story. You can go as far back, even Walker Held. Again, the list goes on as far as the sky is definitely a limit for sure.
Yeah, one thing so I came up with a couple hashtags. So there's a couple of them. We're already doing this. Cool. All right, people if you're watching or listening, we're already doing this. All right. So here's some that we kind of used this last year in our podcast especially when Tom first came aboard. We called it the Rising Rockies, or Rockies Rising, whatever you call it. But like Rocktober Quest, that's one. Race to Rocktober. Rocktober Ready. I like that one. Rocktober Ready. I feel like we're about there. Rockies in the Hunt. I like that.
Rockies to the moon.
There you go. Rockies to the moon, baby.
Here's another one. Rockies on the Rise.
Yeah, Rockies on the Rise. Yeah. So again, we'll throughout the off season going into next year, and I'm sure next year we'll have a hashtag, because again, one thing I will say again, I shared this with Tom just recently this week via text, and I think I sent it to Tom. If not, to Adam. If not, I'll make sure to send a text to Adam. But we're going to be rebranding our page next year, getting new logos, new stuff, and one of the things that we will do for opening day and all that, we're going to be doing a kind of like that hashtag thing. So when we do opening day or whatever, we're going to do a special post, and we're going to be using that hashtag all season long. And I think it if it works, great. And if it doesn't, we'll save it for next year. But it's just, I'm excited for next year already, man. But again, it's off season. Yeah. I mean, it's just like, get the season started already. Again, watching postseason baseball like today was just like making me hungry for Rocktober, man, because as much as, people joke about, oh, it's the shortest month of the year, blah, 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 whatever. It's just, there's nothing like it. I mean, going back to 2018, it was so much fun. And just seeing the Rockies celebrate in the clubhouse with the champagne and everything, it gives you excitement, man, of like, hey, it could be us this year. We could be that team. We could be holding up the commissioner's trophy, right? And it just gives you that hope of like, hey, again, that could be us. And again, there's nothing like it. And I know, even though a lot of us sometimes it's like, oh man, in the postseason, it makes your anxiety go up, it makes your heart rate go up. But at the same time, though, that's what makes baseball. It's worth it. Exactly. It makes baseball a lot more fun, right? And so I just want that back, and I think we'll get there. And again, it's a trial by fire, man. That's really what it is about with the young Rockies, with what we have, trial by fire. And it's worked before, and it's going to happen again. And it's going to work again. And I feel like we're right there. So, I mean, it's going to be a fun off season. Like, again, this is our second podcast of the off season. We're going to have a fun one, a lot of stuff coming up. Just today, we released our first Name That Rocky. So go check that out on our social media pages. Go give your hints at that. So we already have a bunch of people that got that correctly. So don't cheat. Just look at the post and then give your guess. So we're excited for that. So again, Rockies, Name That Rockies will be coming out every single Thursday. So that should be fun. And then also one thing we're going to be doing every single Tuesday is Trivia Tuesday. We'll be posting that out as well. We'll be posting that as a Twitter format sort of thing. So keep an eye on that. So that'll be coming out next Tuesday. And of course, our podcast will be happening. Generally, we're going to try to do that every single Thursday like today. So it's going to be, it's going to be a fun off season. I'm excited for it. Of course, I'm excited to have Adam aboard with us. And for those who want to follow Adam, where can people follow you?
Oh, I did not put that on here, did I?
Okay. Yeah.
I'll put it on there next time. I'm sorry.
All right. For sure.
I'll put it on there next time.
Yeah, for sure. But yeah, Adam, thanks for coming on in. And of course, we're excited to have you aboard with Rockies Now to the podcast. And we're just excited for the future of the page, and not only of the page, but for the Colorado Rockies as well. So it's going to be awesome. We're excited for that. So on behalf of Tom, myself, and Adam, thank you for listening to this edition of the Rockies Now podcast. We'll catch you next time. And as always, go Rockies.